Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. My name's Simon Hodgkins and I'm delighted to be joined by Peter McPartlin today. Peter, you're very welcome to the podcast. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about the journey and all your business expertise with our international audience today. Over to you, Peter.
Simon, thank you very much. Yeah, delighted to be here. My career, I suppose, boy and man, if I can say that, has been largely within the media and marketing industry, primarily in Ireland. And I've worked with some of the kind of largest, best-known agencies. From an international perspective, most of the names would be familiar, I'm sure, to many of your listeners. So people like BBDO, I've worked with OMD, the media agencies. So my background is primarily media planning, media strategy. So BBDO, OMD, I worked for Dentsu or Carat as it was then, and then ended up as CEO of MediaCom when they set up their office in Ireland. They asked me to run that, and that was after my kind of slight radio career. I'll tell you about that in a second. So my agency background, and it's been largely ad agency, media agency. I've ended up working on a lot of really interesting pieces of business and really interesting clients. Some not so interesting, it has to be said as well. But, magnificent brands like Guinness and, all of the kind of Mars portfolio and so on, just to name two. I've had a particular leaning because of my natural interest in media towards a lot of kind of telco media type clients. So I've worked with Sky, for instance. I've worked with a lot of the radio operators, people like the Daily Mail Group, Media House or Independent News and Media as it used to be. And then as a result of kind of various bits of consultancy that I did with some of those organizations over the course of my career, I ended up being invited to come on board as the CEO of Today FM. Again, for those of your international listeners who wouldn't be familiar with Today FM, it is still the most successful independent radio station in the Irish market. And it kind of came from nowhere, unsuccessful to start with, and then built a really good, strong brand and reputation. Lost a bit of luster along the way, and I was asked to come in, not with any background in programming as such, but more from a commercial point of view, but to run that organization. And to be honest, I originally said no. Had to kick myself and say, why am I saying no? And just decided, look, I love this brand. I listen to it every day. I think I could actually do a job for this thing. And it's not that my advertising career was fading at that stage, but I said, do I want to be a 50 or 60-year-old guy working in ad agencies, still talking about media plans? I think there's something bigger there that I can be part of and influence along the way. And I spent 4.5 years as part of Communicore and primarily on Today FM. And I have to say, I mean, they're obviously like every part of the journey, there's kind of ups and downs, but I learned so much about people, managing people, and obviously learned a bit about, managing radio and the personalities that go with radio. And some of the egos weren't necessarily on air. A lot of the egos were off air, but it was magnificent. It was a great time. And it's great to see that the station continues to thrive. I can't say I was the instigator of that kind of rebirth of Today FM, but I'd like to think that I did my bit, as did the management team along the way at that time. And we made some really interesting developments. We set up a sister station called TXFM. And for me, it was all about breeding the next generation of presenters for this really strong national brand, which had an aging presenter profile, if you like. So it was important that we almost had a talent farm of the next generation of presenters that was coming up. So I saw the opportunity to launch this smaller station, literally on a shoestring, called TXFM. And all of the people who were on that station at the time are now working either on Today FM or other parts of the radio industry. So it was great. It was a great endorsement of a strategy that we undertook at that point. More recently, what I've done, so I went back agency side, and then I contracted to help kind of get MediaCom up and running. And then I decided to go back out on my own, and I was consulting primarily again with media companies for a number of years up until the beginning of COVID, obviously a life-changing event for the globe and for individuals and companies and so on. And a pal of mine who both of us used to work together in BBDO, Herlihy, we established this thing called the Indie List. And the Indie List, or the list as Una originally called it and was the founder of, was designed to try and help people freelance marketing people and freelance creative people find work when the first lockdown hit during COVID. So if you remember back all those years ago, only 2.5 years ago, where work for particularly independent workers just fell off a cliff. And Una, as she said, sitting in her hammock in her back garden, said, look, all of these frontline workers are doing amazing work. What can I do as a marketeer, as somebody who has really good network? So we spoke, and I said, look, I think there's the basis of something that we can both do that will help people get work, but might also be the germ of a kind of a long-term business idea. And we just kind of set out, bootstrapped the idea, launched it, thankfully with no great understanding or knowledge of the global freelance market, because I think if we realized then what we know now, we probably wouldn't have launched it, certainly not launched it as a business. It is such a vibrant market. There's so many different competitors internationally. There's so many big players like Fiverr and Upwork and TopTal. There's so many niche players, but we plowed on regardless because we didn't know anything about it. We heard of Fiverr. In fact, I'd used Fiverr at one point, but never considered it as a competitor, and never considered the diversity and the opportunity that something like freelancing presented as a business. So we plowed on, and we got a great kind of tailwind of support from both the communications agencies, the media industry in Ireland, and then clearly freelancers themselves who are looking for opportunities to find new work. And thankfully, with the networks both myself and Una had, we were able to deliver work for them relatively quickly. And it's gone like a rocket since then. It's just been a revelation, to be honest. And every day has just been, I'll say it maybe a couple of times in this podcast, a school day, Simon, but it's been great. And we've had so much support, and we get so much satisfaction out of it. We may not be getting rich, well, maybe not yet, but we're really, happy with the impact that we've made so far. And I think it's been recognized by our peers, not just even locally, but globally as well, which is even more fulfilling from that point of view. So sorry, that's a long intro.
It's a great intro. Peter, I really like what yourself and Una are doing at the Indie List. And I'm not just saying that because we were talking a little bit before we started recording this episode today. And one of the things that I shared with you is I think there's a real love for the brand. I think there's a real feeling of people wanting to support what the Indie List is doing. And it was born, I suppose, out of almost necessity. The freelancers, the talented artists, the people that were able to do this sort of more creative type work, maybe, I found it extremely difficult during the pandemic. But also, I think there's been two elements driving this, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong here. But from my view of looking at the landscape here, people want to use creative freelance talent for lots of reasons. Obviously, there's the cost. It can be much more cost effective than having to hire people, and then you've got them for a long time, where you may just want them for a particular project. But also, you want the skill and the talent that a specific person may bring to a specific project. And often that's quite difficult, and it's very hard to hire somebody who has absolutely everything that you're looking for. So having this list, the list as it was originally called, or that's a bit like the Facebook and just call it Facebook story, the Indie List as it is now, I think it gives you this range of skills and expertise. It can save you time. It can save you money. So that's the one half. And the other thing I want to maybe suggest is that there's been a big shift in the way people work. My father's generation and my generation to some degree, you got a job, you might have 2 or 3 roles throughout your career. You tried to make a living, you tried to make some money. If you got lucky, you made a lot of money, or you went and worked for yourself, right?
Yes.
Whereas today, I think more and more people are thinking about who they work for, how they work, when they want to work, what their situation is, where they work from, and the type of work they want to do. And I don't think, and I could be wrong here, Peter, you know more about this than I do, but I don't think there is the same leave school or college, go into employment, work for the rest of your life approach to it anymore. I think it's very fragmented. And I think people like to live almost a nomadic freelance lifestyle in some cases, particularly in the area of the creative fields, the creative arts and the creative talents. So Am I completely off message here, or how's
No,
this
not at
sounding?
all, not at all. I mean, you've kind of captured there a lot of the things that we've seen, and we're not just seeing. It's not unique to Ireland. It's happening in every other developed market right across the world. It's happening at a faster pace, maybe in places like the States and some of the markets in mainland Europe. It's happening in India. So it is definitely a trend, and I think we talked about it slightly earlier, that COVID has, for all the bad things that COVID brought, it kind of unleashed a lot of kind of embedded thinking around the way in which people believe they had to work and which companies believe they had to work on their behalf. So what we've seen more and more is that there's a greater acceptance now, because of what happened during COVID, that full-time workers weren't based in an office or based in a factory or wherever they were before. They were working from home. So I think more and more companies were accepting of the fact that, first of all, they didn't need to have their own workers working in their place of work. They could get it just as much and better work sometimes from the people working at home. And then it was a realization that actually maybe you don't need, for certain types of roles and certain types of skills, you don't necessarily need to have them on your books every day. And sometimes you just need to bring people in that will be a catalyst to a project or a catalyst to your existing team to overcome a blockage or whatever. So bringing in, particularly around things like e-commerce, we saw quite a bit of it during COVID, where, to use that awful word, pivot, retailers were having to pivot suddenly into being specialists in e-commerce, but just couldn't find the skills or couldn't recruit them quickly enough. And we found people for various Irish companies at the time that would help them get into the e-commerce space relatively quickly. They weren't on their books. They were charging them a decent amount of money, but they were still much more cost effective than having them on their books for forever and a day. And I think you're right. I mean, what people have begun to realize, particularly, I won't say older people, but more professional workers who've been at it for some time, is that, a combination of burnout, a combination of ageism, a combination of being removed from the work that they really enjoy doing in a large corporate. They might have the corner office, they might have the big salary, they might have the car and all the other so-called perks, but the satisfaction attached to work had kind of evaporated over time the more you moved up the kind of corporate ladder. And what we were seeing, myself and Una, was that a lot of the people that either we worked with or wanted to work with when we were working in BBDO, the people that you'd say, oh, geez, I'd love to work with that creative person or that planner or whatever, they were working for competitors. But what we were seeing over time was that some brilliant people were now kind of, I won't say footloose and fancy free, but they were free of the constrictions of working in competitors. So you could almost put together a fantasy football team, if you like, of the best talent around town to, work on behalf of clients or work on behalf of agencies, even, because agencies are a big employer still of freelance talent. And I think what also people realized was that, fitting work into your life was more important than fitting life into your work, because, a lot of people were working to live, not the other way around. And I think COVID kind of shook those assumptions for a lot of people and said, look, I need to get things back into kilter again. Money clearly is important, and, I won't for a moment say it's not, but thankfully, or shouldn't be the driver, particularly for people who've been working in the business for a long time. It shouldn't be the only be all and end all. I think a lot of people realize that, the motivation, we spend so much time working that the satisfaction you get out of work, if you're not getting that, if the workplace is toxic, if the people you're working with, the boss that you're working for is toxic, don't hang around. And people have much more choice now. And there are many more people who will employ you for the expertise that you have than ever before. And through companies like the Indie List and so many others, that opportunity has never been better,
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And I suppose with the Indie List, it works both ways, doesn't it? Because, for somebody in an organization, a corporate, a multinational, or somebody running a local ad agency in Ireland, you can go on, you can find the talent, the expertise that you want, and you can sort of get access to it right there and then from a credible source. But it works the other way too, doesn't it? The talent can actually go on and find work.
Exactly. Yeah. And what we did, I mean, as we keep saying, we're building the plane as we're flying it. The first thing that we focused on was building the community. And people talk about communities, and they are hard to build. And look, we struggle with it. Can't say it's perfect, We have this kind of mantra of earn, learn, and connect. Most people, no matter what marketplace or platform or whatever in the jobs market they sign up for, they are there to try and earn more money. That's primarily what they're there for. We don't have jobs. We have 1,200 people on the indie list at the moment. It's grown quite like a rocket. Maybe small in the context of global markets, but they are focused on the marketing services area and all very, very skilled. But we've spent a lot of time, certainly in the last 12 months, trying to build the community aspects of it, because we don't have jobs every day for everybody on the list. But what we've tried to be is a lighthouse brand for people who've chosen to go the freelance route, or people who've been freelancing for some time, because it can be a pretty lonely existence. What are the things that we can provide for the indie list to be a kind of a soft landing place for those people? So what advice can we give them around tax and insurance and training and connecting them in with other people? So that's as much of that as a place to earn money. And that's what we've been very focused on. And I think we'll be even more focused on over the course of the next couple of months. But look, we can talk about that later on. Yeah. But at the same time, what we were trying to build was our brand. I know it can be a bit kind of cliched and, you know, maybe negative in some people's eyes, but you do need to have a kind of a brand, what would say, personality or persona or whatever. And we've tried to build that from day one. Look, that's our business. That's what we've been doing for so many other people. And it has to come, it's not just a kind of a logo and a set of words. It has to be the thing that you absolutely believe in. The thing that myself, and interestingly, the first thing we did when we said we were going to double down on this thing was that we would separately write down our set of principles. What are the things, Una, that you believe represent what you stand for in business? And I'll do the same. We'll go off and do that, and we'll see what they look like. And we came back with 9 things, and they were literally the same. And I said, that's it. We're both on the same page. Now, sometimes there's always, and you have to have a bit of friction in business in the nicest possible way. But, you know, from the outset, we knew what we stood for or wanted to stand for. And I think that's very much reflected in what the Indie List brand is. And also the kind of love, I think, that we've managed to build up for it, both amongst our community, but also people who support us, you know.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. You make some very interesting points there. And to add to that, and maybe to go into it a little bit more, the one thing that I read with interest was your survey. You released a survey, you know, the 2023 survey,
yes,
the Indie List Freelancer, and there's some interesting facts and figures there that I thought was incredible. And one of the things that stands out to me is obviously that 7 out of 10 freelancers, within the marketing communication sector, they reported a rise in projects over the last 12 months. So there's more work. And then coupled to that, there was another statistic that jumped out at me that said about the average gross earnings for marketing freelancers was higher than I would imagine it would have been. Now, I know it's a combination of maybe some of their own clients and the work that they get from the Indie List. I get that.
Absolutely.
But overall, the average, their earnings were up 12% year on year.
Yes.
Which I think is quite interesting, because when we think of COVID, pandemic, lockdowns, we don't necessarily think about a growth in business. And you've used the term, you know, our business has rocketed, and you've added many more people to your platform, many more specialists to the platform.
Yes.
But not only that, it's not just, well, we've added more people. It's, you know, 7 out of 10 of the freelancers are saying, well, hey, I'm busier than I've ever been.
Yeah.
And also I'm making more money than I've ever made.
Yes, yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, I think the note that I put in the survey at the time was that clearly samples are going to change from year to year. I think the makeup of the sample might have slightly influenced the increase, but I think nonetheless, what we have seen is that there are more companies, more enterprises, I should say, using freelancers in our experience in 2022 than there were in 2021. And that's back to the point I was making. I think there's a greater acceptance by companies that you can bring in a really highly qualified freelancer for a couple of days a week, albeit and pay them a higher rate than you would not necessarily pay somebody who's on your full-time payroll, but they'll still work out and make a bigger contribution to whatever project or, you know, blockage that you've come up against to help you move a project on than you know, hoping to hire somebody that could take 3 to 6 months to get on board, you know. So I think that's a real significant change, and it's taken a while for it to happen in Ireland. We've seen it happen quite a bit. You know, we have really good colleagues in the States and elsewhere and they're saying that's the way it's gone, and that's the way it will go in the Irish market as well. So it's really encouraging. Yeah, it's
And
for every positive story you'll hear from a freelancer, you can equally hear a negative one. So it's not uniform. There's a lot of people we know who are on our platform who are maybe not, who for their own good reasons have chosen to paddle their own canoes, we'd say. So not everybody's doing well, and we're very, very aware of that, and that's why we tried to provide those other things to try and help freelancers. So we speak to people every day who are thinking of signing up. We don't force people. We can't force people to sign up. You can't force people to do anything, but say, look, we may not be able to find work for you, but why don't you join up anyway and come along to our webinars, come along to the kind of free advice sessions, because it can be a pretty lonely existence when you're working on your own, as we all know. That the cliche of imposter syndrome, it's true. It's people go through that, and you kind of need the comfort of hearing stories from other people, and that's what we've tried to do with the Indie List as well.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you also split it down between sort of the full-time freelancers, the people where this is their gig, this is what they do.
Yeah.
And then you have sort of like the consultants or the people that might go in for a particular project. And then you've also got I think you term them as the side giggers, right?
Side giggers,
the people that sort of do things now and again, freelancing while they might have something else going on.
Yes.
So it is mixed. I understand that. Yeah.
It is, yeah. And look, there isn't one type of freelancer in that sense, and that's why we've started a program now with some of the marketing colleges, where we think there's a real opportunity for young talent who are coming through the colleges, particularly as say the marketing and tech colleges, to consider freelancing while they're looking for their first full-time role, because they have amazing skills. If we take TikTok alone, there's very few people on the Indie List, and I'd say very few people on a lot of other marketplaces that understand TikTok as well as somebody who's in college or maybe just going to college. And we just think, look, you could probably earn money more freelancing or side gigging for something like that than you could be working in the local, Londis or Super Value or Spar or wherever, So it's encouraging, younger people, particularly, not to say freelancing is a career, but it's an opportunity to develop a portfolio before you go into a full-time career, and also earn some decent money along the way as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point that you make, because I was talking to a freelance illustrator only in the last week or so, and very talented, extremely talented illustrator, illustrates many books, and has brought out his own book early this year. But he was saying that, and I think he posted a video on his YouTube channel about it too, that it's been a very quiet January and February about it. But because he's sort of a seasoned person that works this way, he knows not to panic. He knows the work will come. Now, it's not easy, because obviously the money ebbs and flows too.
Yeah, the bills have to be paid.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly my point. But I suppose that comes along with, and I know it's one of the things that he in particular values, which is the flexibility and the independence.
That's it. Yeah. And that is a big driver. And I think particularly, I mentioned the age thing earlier on, but look, it is a factor. A lot of the really senior people that we have on the Indie List are people who've been squeezed out of large corporates by holding companies and so on, because they've been seen as an expensive overhead. But they've so much embedded knowledge and really brilliant skills. They're basically a loss both to the marketing departments of clients, if that's where they've come from, or from agency life as well. And we've just seen all this talent. And for some of them, like you would probably know some of the individuals if we named them, which I won't, but they've kind of got a new lease of life as a result of us being able to put them into roles that they say, that's the type of work I really enjoy doing. And I got removed from it when I was part of a larger corporate, albeit being well paid for it, but there was little satisfaction in what they were doing, So yeah, it's look, so we get so much satisfaction out of helping people to find work, and just some cases kind of talking them down off the ledge and say, look, there is just bear with us, or trust yourself, trust your instinct. You have to back yourself, and there is a job out there for you. Yeah.
No, thank you, Peter. And the last thing I want to ask you on this in particular is, obviously you work with Una. Now, you worked together before back in agency land.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're coming, you both bring in a wealth of experience to it, whether it's media or agency work or client side. But I'd just be interested, because you're also building this company yourselves, and you mentioned
Yes.
earlier, you know, you're kind of building the airplane as you're flying it sometimes when you're building a
Yes.
business. But you've done such a great job, and there's such a support for the indie list, and it's so well known here. You know, it's so
Yes.
well known as a credible, reputable source and company. I'm just wondering how you and Una go about that from a who does what perspective. How does it actually work behind the scenes? Could you share a bit of insight there?
Well, we look, we work hard on it every day, but we enjoy the work. We have another really good person who works with us, Amanda, who came to us as a freelancer, came from South Africa. She was manager of talent in FCB in Johannesburg. Her mum is Irish. She came over here to mind her mum, her elderly mum, and she signed up with the indie list. And we just felt she's a brilliant person, great organizer, great manager of talent, lovely, as we used to say in the agency, great bedside manner, talking people down off the ledge. And she manages her community. So when people are signing up, she helps them complete their profiles and so on. And she helps us to put together kind of short lists of talent. But the way in which we generally kind of split it up, we both take briefs from clients. We're looking insofar we have a brilliant piece of software that kind of powers our database, or powers the indie list, called WorkSuite. And that allows us to, if you like, categorize the workers and skills and so on. So we can get to a long list pretty quickly. But then myself and Una and Amanda, to a lesser extent, have to kind of curate the lists. So we don't go back to clients with 10 names. We usually go back with 2 names of people that we are happy to stand over, that have passed a kind of indie list test. So we have a number of criteria. We, clearly look for testimonials and previous experience and so on. And then we share those with the client. But so a lot of my work would be around the marketing of the indie list brand. Una does a certain amount of that herself. A lot of Una's work then is around kind of servicing client needs. So we haven't made it kind of a hard and fast rule. Some days I will do that and she does the other bit. But over time, look, as the business is scaling, like any business, it's always that challenge of how do you maintain the thing that's made it special. If we could replicate what Una and I do and create the robots or whatever, but look, it's part of our plan. We're doing some interesting stuff. We're working with one of the universities at the moment to help us scale the business without necessarily having to, because we just don't have the funding to add 10 or more people to it. But there's some interesting developments we hope to be able to announce later on the year on that front. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you, Peter. And I know Amanda Morey is doing some great work on the community side.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And thanks for giving us a little bit of insight into the behind the scenes, because
yeah,
it's a little bit different. Some of the other competitors that you mentioned earlier, I don't know whether I'd term them in as full competitors, because one of the challenges I see with some of the brands that you mentioned is you kind of hire somebody and then you hope it's going to work out.
Yes.
Whereas with the indie list, you're almost doing, you're passing the indie list test. You're kind of being almost pre-qualified. You come in with almost a check mark, a quality sort of mark with it. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. And that's, if you like, our secret sauce. Our challenge is how do we replicate that over time? As the business grows, as demands grow from clients, how can Una and myself stay close to that kind of curation of that final list so the client doesn't have to wade through 10 names if they went to one of the global platforms? I think that's been a big turnoff for a lot of clients. Is that's great. I can get this person in Indonesia who'll do my logo for $50, but and their portfolio looks great, but I'm not, there's another guy over here who does them for $25. So we're all about, I think some of those bigger platforms, without dissing them, I won't name them, but they kind of commoditize the talent. We're very much about the talent getting the value for the work that they do and the contribution that they make. And I think a lot of companies like ours that we have a really close affiliation with are of a similar frame of mind, that, people who've chosen the freelance route, freelancer doesn't mean free or low cost, or it shouldn't mean. Unfortunately, that's a tag that's gone with it over years. And, we, and I think a number of companies like us are keen to get away from that. Freelancing is good value, I think, for most enterprises, but it shouldn't be low cost labor for the people who are doing it.
I think that's such an important point, Peter. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to just touch on as well, because I don't want to run out of time with you today, and I do want to ask you a few other things.
Talking too much.
But no, it's not that. It's just there's so much I could ask you, and one of the things that's on my mind as you're talking is Because, you know, you've been the CEO of a national radio station, right? You've been involved in the ad agency business for many years. You know, you bring in an awful lot of expertise, knowledge, wisdom, and insight to the table. But you mentioned TikTok earlier, you know, and you were talking about maybe that younger person in college or coming out and starting to work, maybe in let's say not a high paying job initially, and they could probably make more money from doing that side gigging. But I suppose the world is a little different, isn't it now, Peter? Because when I think back to when I got involved, you know, many, many moons ago, it was print TV and radio predominantly. You
Yes.
know, it was a bit about above the line, below the line, invest in your brand. And I don't want to simplify it. There was a lot of smart people involved in terms of the creative and the copy.
Yes.
But it wasn't this fragmented world where there's a new app popping up every 2 seconds. There's a new platform to think about. There's a change of owner on the social media platform, or chat GPT and AI coming along. So
Yes.
when you look at it from your, you know, your perspective of working with all these creative freelancers on your list and sort of the more traditional world, it's almost as though they're colliding to some degree. Because if you'd have said to me, and I was talking to somebody recently, if you'd have said to me that there was going to be chat GPT prompt engineers, and that was going to be a
Yes.
gig that you needed to hire somebody for, somebody that could write a prompt so the AI engine could actually give you a better output than the next company or the next client. Or if you
Yes.
just said we need a drone pilot because we need to take video in a certain manner, these things didn't exist 10 years ago.
Not at all. Yeah, yeah, and it's difficult. So that the old traditional agency model, where it all had to be under one roof, and then media split off into the whole kind of media independence route. But even now, like, we deal with a lot of the agencies, both the big international ones, but also the medium to smaller niche ones who earn good money. But they all find it really difficult to keep on top of the skills gap, or the skills demand, I should say, from clients. It's impossible to have, you know, the drone pilot or the drone expert or the TikTok expert or the chat GPT prompter on your payroll, because, you know, not every client needs them or wants them. So where are you going to go? As we keep saying, you know, work needs to get done. And despite all of the kind of layoffs, either quietly or not so quietly, that have gone on in the corporate world over the last couple of months, you know, work still needs to get done. And if people as freelancers are positioning themselves properly and are skilled enough and eager enough, I think the work is there for them. Absolutely, you know. And I think there's more opportunity now than there ever was, because of what's happened to media and communications and culture and so on. I was at a talk this morning by a man called Mark Little. I'm not sure if you know Mark, but Mark was the founder. He was former CEO of Twitter in Ireland. He founded Storyful, which was bought by the Murdoch Empire, and then he founded a thing called Kinsen with a partner of his. And both of those were designed to kind of qualify the deluge of content and misleading content that obviously has been part and parcel of the internet, and verify it. So verify video in the case of Storyful, or verify all sorts of content in the case of Kinsen. But we're having this conversation around the way in which, like, media is very much, there's always inflection points, but for me, there's big inflection points at the moment in media. Everybody seems to be losing. So, you know, the days when TV was losing to streamers and radio was losing to Spotify and newspapers were losing to Google and Meta are losing, Google are losing, Spotify is not exactly setting the world on fire. No disrespect to your hosts of your podcast and so on. Subscription model is under threat. You know, there's very, very few people gaining. You know, it was always somebody won or somebody lost. Now everybody is kind of, and the point he was making is that, you know, I think there's a realization by audiences to a certain extent that, you know, there has been so much misinformation and misabuse, or abuse of media and media power, that there's a kind of a gravitation towards sort of trustworthy sources of news, and he believes they will be paid for. I'm not so sure. I'd like to believe that they will, but also then you've kind of fragmentation into kind of, you know, hate speech and ultra right wing or ultra left or whatever it might be. So there's all sorts of, it really is an unusual time at the moment in the media world. And for me, as somebody who's kind of lived and breathed the media business, and it's a business that I love. It's just a really, really interesting time. It's scary in parts, but I think, for people entering the business who are thinking of media as a career, I would say to them, there's never been a better time to consider media. And, sometimes looking inward, you'd go, it's not a business that you want to be in. I think it is. I think there's always opportunity for really sound, creative people who have keep an open mind, I really, really do. So anyway, that's my two halfpence worth on that.
I think you're spot on. I agree with what you're saying there, because I think some people can thrive in that chaos. They can pinpoint a way through that. And I think there's a democratization of media. There's a democratization of content.
Yes.
And maybe some of the big players may or may not be as powerful. There's obviously a human element in here where there's a very divided, whether it's news content or politics, pick the country. There's challenges everywhere. And I know Mark, what the work that he's doing. I think he did some great work with Kinson, and of course, Storyful was a huge success story.
Yes.
For him. And but I do think in terms of the fragmentation of all the platforms, the skills are very different now. You can become a specialist in one particular niche of a particular area.
Yes. Yeah.
And it takes somebody time and learning, as opposed to maybe, well, I've worked at XYZ for 30 years. That's good in some contexts, but also it's a little bit about, well, show me what you can do, I think is maybe part of the discussion now. And the other thing you mentioned about the ad agencies trying to keep up with the talent gap, I think that's very true, because I can remember a time in Ireland specifically where the big, well-respected ad agencies hadn't a clue at some of the newer stuff coming through. I mean, they hadn't a notion, particularly around social media, for example. So what they did is they all went out and bought a small enough company that was just about making enough money to keep the lights on, and they put them in the Muse at the back of the HQ, and they bolted it on, and then all of a sudden it became part of the portfolio, because they were, they had enough cash on hand or enough stock to make those deals happen. But it doesn't seem to be the same logic now. It's not the same as just bolting on a little agency anymore and just adding it to the services that you offer. It seems to be a little bit different now, Peter.
It is very much so. Yeah, there was definitely a period within the kind of holding company model where it was acquired them. If we don't have them internally, then acquired them. There was enough cash washing around the big holding companies to acquire those niche companies. And inevitably what happened was that the most talented people, the founders usually, the day that they were bought, or as quickly as they could, they went off with their saddlebags full and maybe set up down the road with something else. I believe, for instance, the lads in Instagram who set up Instagram and then obviously subsequently bought by Meta or Facebook at the time, are now setting up what, from what I understand, is the equivalent of Storyful. It's kind of vetting news content and making sure it's all above board. So it's interesting how these things happen. And but I think what's happened now with the big kind of holding companies, whether that's in the PR world or the advertising world, is that they just don't have the cash anymore to acquire those kind of niches. They were rolling them out in new business pitches and say, we have this brilliant expert who can do, has this black box technology or capability to answer all of your kind of social media ills. And the clients weren't buying it. They're saying, I can get that from somebody else. I'll hire the best. I don't necessarily want to hire your social media expert or your, motion graphics person or whoever it might be. I'll hire my own. Thank you very much. So clients were almost picking their own kind of fantasy football team, and now even more so with freelancing, they can do that.
And your story about Instagram being sold, I believe, and I can't remember the exact number, but it was something tiny. I'm going to say 13, but I might be completely wrong. The amount of staff that were there at the time, it was a very small, agile, nimble business that was very technology focused and became a global success. And they paid a lot of money for it, and maybe the guys could have held on and got more in the long run, but they certainly made out very, very well, and it became such an important part of now the Meta portfolio. And and those guys, like you were saying, they stayed around for a little while with the purchasing company, and then they exit and they're on to the next thing.
Got moved to the Muse building in wherever in Silicon Valley, and then said,
exactly,
let's move on.
Well, look, thank you, Peter. That's been great. I want to ask you a couple of other things if I can. I want to just ask you a few other things. I want to ask you about your own learning style. Because
Yes.
obviously you've been involved in an awful lot. But when it comes to keeping abreast of what's happening, do you are you scouring the internet? Are you listening to audiobooks? Are you a reader? Do you pick up a book? Do you
Yeah.
read for pleasure or business? Or at the end of the day, you've just had enough, you need to turn on Netflix? How does it work for you?
I'm voracious reader of all sorts. And news junkie. I'm happy to admit I'm a news junkie as well. Yeah, I kind of hoover up the news. So yeah, there's a variety of things that are kind of my go-to around but the business I'm in, as in the marketing business generally, or the culture business, I'd prefer to kind of refer to as. So there's a couple of kind of key media. So there's newspapers first. I'm still a old-fashioned newspaper reader. So things like the Irish Times in print, New York Times I get on subscription, Guardian on subscription, brilliant publication. I'm not sure if you've come across it, called The Currency, which is a business publication. Well, it's business, economics, and sport. So it's a bit like The Atlantic, but I think it's actually better. And it's done by two brilliant guys who have fantastic contributors. But anyway, I think they have it really nailed. There's a couple of newsletters that I find really, really, you kind of have to read them every week. There's one on music, tech, business, and culture called Redef. I'm not sure if you've come across it, but if you're interested in music and culture generally, it's by a guy called Jason Hirschhorn, I think his name is. But he just has a magnificent take on all of the developments that are going on, particularly in music, but how they overlap into technology as well. There's another one from a man called Benedict Evans, called Benedict's Newsletter. And again, a guy that has just an incredible grasp on what's going on in the tech world, and putting it into context. Also, that kind of touches on the advertising and subscription market as well. And then a recent one that I've come across again, which has just been brilliant because it's close to home with the indie list, is a thing called Recruiting Brain Food. And it's done by a man in Hong Kong called Herlihy. But somebody had referred it to me, and it's just been magnificent, just opening our eyes in terms of what's going on in the world of work market. We all read about the world of work and how it's changing, but this newsletter, which is once a week on Sundays, it's just a great read. Listen quite a bit to obviously radio, maybe not as much as I used to when I was in the station, but listen quite a lot to podcasts. Listen to your own more frequently in recent times, because obviously I was doing today, but again, compliments on what you've achieved. But a couple of go-to ones for me, again, on the news front, would be Ukraine Cast from the BBC, because of what's going on there. I think they have a really good read on both on the ground and internationally. The Stand, which is an Irish podcast by the legendary Eamon Dunphy, and it's been running for a number of years. Eamon used to be a presenter on Today FM, but gets brilliant contributors from all over the world. Big into history, particularly Irish history. There's a podcast called Three Castles Burning, which is all about Irish history. Fantastic. And they would be the main ones, to be honest. To be honest, as I listen quite a bit, walking the dog, going to the gym, and just reading at night and in between everything else. So yeah, look, there's so many different things. Also, books. I don't read enough books, but I read the books that interest me. So the ones that stand out for me tend to be less about business, even though they have a kind of a business angle to them. Best one that I've read in recent times was by Nick Cave. And it's called, Fate, Hope, and Carnage. And basically what he's interviewed during COVID over the course of 2 years in a very, very traumatic time, not just for the world, but for him personally. One of his sons had a really died. His second son died after the book was done, but also that kind of creative journey that he was on as a result of the influence of his son dying on his art. But just an amazing book that I'd really encourage anybody who's into creativity, and even things like religion. I don't mean in a kind of a church ecclesiastical sense, but that just rediscovery of a kind of a higher being. Just an amazing book. And he's interviewed by a journalist called Sean O'Hagan, but the two of them are clearly friends, but he's able to ask Nick questions that nobody would ever get away with asking, and it's just it's just a brilliant piece of meditation almost on art, on culture, and on fate almost. And there's some other ones that I've come across. There's a great book by Rory Sutherland, who's, brilliant behavioral economist who works for Ogilvy, called Alchemy. And he's just, again, brilliant. It's, you don't have to be in the marketing business to really appreciate a book like this. It just talks about the kind of the unreasonable things, or the decision making that consumers, or we all go through, that defy logic. And it's how things like marketing and branding and prompting can encourage people to make certain types of decisions. But really, really recommend that book. And there's another one that's kind of close to home on Spotify. It's called Tarzan Economics. It's done by the guy who was the chief economist for Spotify. And he's just, again, kind of woven in stories about how the music business has changed and the lessons that the music business has gone through for every other business that has to pivot again as a result of COVID and various other challenges. So whether that's the newspaper business or the tech business, it's really, really great reads. And, I tend to avoid those books from the, if you like, the titans of industry that are always post-rationalized, on how great I am and am I marvelous, because there's always the other side to it that you never hear. So I tend to avoid those type of books. Yeah.
Yeah, I've read Alchemy. I think it's a brilliant book too. I'd echo that. I haven't read Nick Cave's book.
Yeah.
But any journalist that can get good answers out of Nick Cave, I admire, because he was very well known for his fraught relationships with journalists. So I that's been added to my list automatically.
Yes.
I shall definitely dive into that one.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned some other good ones there that I wasn't aware of. A couple that I subscribed to The Currency and some of the news publications you mentioned, whether it's the Irish Times or the Guardian or the FT, and I'm constantly in discussions with other members of the family about why do I need an online subscription and a print edition, and I just can't. If you've got any good answers that I can use, let me know.
Yeah. Oh, look, when I used to do some work for independent news media, as when the chief executive used to say, in defense of the newspaper versus the internet, he said, we have the ultimate browser. Why would we want to go the route of the newspaper is the ultimate browser? You kind of come across things serendipitously, to use that word, in a newspaper every day, that stuff that you would never thought of reading before. And yeah, I'm still an old-fashioned kind of newspaper guy as well. Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. I've very fond memories of going into a library when I was a student and grabbing the broadsheet which was stuck to like a wooden hanging cane.
Yes.
To read it, because I, as a student, I wasn't buying every broadsheet, but I've a certain love and passion for the printed word, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, long may it continue. Obviously it's going through a moment. So it's kind of hard to see it ever getting back. Although vinyl records made a recovery, maybe printed newspapers will as well. Yeah.
You never know. And I think it's interesting what you're saying earlier as well, because it makes me think, Peter, about building a brand and that trust, the word trust that you used earlier.
Yes.
And it's so important because you kind of buy a publication because you like reading certain journalists in newspapers' cases, or you look forward to that newsletter from that person because it adds meaning and value, and there's a level of engagement, and you value the content, and that all comes from that trust and that brand, doesn't it? And that feeling part of somebody else's community.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And also kind of stimulating you, providing you with information that you didn't expect, contradicting your view or your maybe perceptions or previously held views. So you want things to challenge you as well. And I think that's certainly what I get or look for in the media that I buy. And I try to buy because, look, if you don't pay for it, then it's going to disappear. Thankfully, some of the newsletters are still free, but look, I'll probably pay for those if they do going to charge.
Yeah, I was there's a great technology guy called Leo Laporte, and he, I learned from him early on, many moons ago, that you kind of got a lot of apps for free when they first came out. And why would you pay for them? You can just get the free ones. But then what you realized was a lot of the free ones started to disappear. So unless you were paying for a subscription for a particular app, it wasn't going to be there next year,
Absolutely.
And I think you're right. It's the same with good content. It's the same with good media. If you support it, it will continue and flourish. If you don't, it may not be there tomorrow.
Yeah. And the same thing applies to music. I mean, we have such a brilliant music scene or music hotbed of talent in the Irish market, but it's become so much. It's ironic in a way. it's become so much more difficult for talented musicians and songwriters and composers to make money. But the industry has never been, as in the output has never been better. In the history of Irish music, certainly in my kind of understanding of it, it's never been better. Literally across every genre, there's an equivalent Irish artist that's as good, if not better, than some of the international ones. Now, some of your international listeners might disagree, but unfortunate thing is very, very few of them are earning money. And it's not Spotify's problem. Spotify has given exposure to acts that sometimes would never get international exposure. But yeah, the model is not great, unfortunately. Yeah. But so I make a point. I go to quite a lot of gigs, tend to be smaller gigs, but buy the album, buy a bit of merch, because sometimes it's the only way in which the artist can actually make a bit of money.
Well, for anybody who's interested in music, I did a great, I'm not plugging my own thing here, but I did a great episode with the Tom Morley, who was the founder, or one of the founders of Scritti Politti.
Yes.
He was the drummer. Very, very key person. But during the discussion I had with him, he shared with me the story of how the band actually got its first record deal out. Got its first airing on the BBC. And the story is mind-blowing. How that band ever made it is incredible, because they were turned down by the record studio. They couldn't get a deal. And they had to go and make their own first indie record. No pun intended, but they had to go and physically make a record and hand it to the doorman at the BBC and say, hey, could you give that to the DJ? Ask him to have a listen. And they were listening to it on a little wireless in a pub that evening, just sitting there hoping that it would get played. It's honestly, anybody who's got any interest in the music industry, have a listen to Tom Morley. He's one of those creative geniuses that is doing a lot of good in the world. Great thinker.
Well, I know we're nearly stuck for time, Simon. I don't know how, but you can cut this out if you like. But we were lucky enough in the first couple of months of the indie list to persuade Bob Geldof to be a judge of an initiative that we came up with called the Indie Spirit Awards. So we asked our community to come up with some idea to promote the spirit of independence, and we were able to persuade Bob, as a former freelancer, to be the judge, but also to be the prize. So the winner would go over and meet Bob with myself and Una in London, and spend what we thought maybe half an hour. He'd come along and shake the hand, but he stayed for over 2 hours at lunch and told us some incredible stories. And obviously we asked him, it was Christmas time, we asked him about Band-Aid. But back to the Band-Aid story, and not dissimilar to what you're talking about at Scritti Politti, he said Band-Aid wouldn't have happened without a BBC DJ deciding to play the song back-to-back 20 times one particular day, because the song had got a certain amount of PR because of Geldof and the people involved, but it was just on the kind of a normal playlist. Simon, I can't think of the DJ's name, but anyway, he decided this was one of the best Christmas records he ever heard. And he effectively locked the studio and said, I'm going to keep playing this thing until everybody else in the station starts putting it on their heavy rotation list as well, And he said that was the moment the thing took off. People were buying literally 20 copies in Virgin megastores, handing back 19 because the pressing plants couldn't keep up with demand, asking people, make the donation by buying more and give back the 19 so somebody else can buy them, But yeah, incredible. But look,
wow, that's an incredible story. Incredible. Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. Before we run out of time, I want to just squeeze in a couple more if I can, real quick.
Sure.
Throughout your career, your journey, your life so far, there must be people that have inspired you along the way. Who do you admire? Who's inspired you? Or maybe it's a particular type of person. What springs to mind when I ask you that question?
Again, I won't kind of credit the kind of usual kind of gurus and so on that again, have their own kind of flawed pedigree along the way. I mean, the people that really inspired me, and I think inspired our family, were our parents, and I think we all are kind of products of our upbringing. We were really lucky. We had, we came from, I'm not going to give you the Angela's Ashes story, but a working class background. My dad was a plasterer, my mum was a seamstress. But they always kind of instilled in us that kind of belief in working hard. A hard day's work hard, you get paid for a hard day's work, but also respect as well for workers, regardless of the work that they did. So it didn't matter whether you're a binman or a chief executive, that everybody was deserving of respect. And I think that's certainly rubbed off on me in my career within the advertising, media, marketing business, because look, we all know there's egos at play, maybe on speed in the marketing business, particularly, that sometimes you lose connection with reality and people get caught. You know, that awful phrase of move fast and break things. What often happens is move fast and people get broken. And, you know, my kind of style of management has always been, well, I try to be as empathetic as possible. Yes, you have to make hard decisions, but doing it in a way that's respectful of people and, you know, what people are going through. Not making myself out to be a saint, but, you know, it's treating others as the way you want your kids to be treated is kind of a mantra for me, you know. So my parents kind of were a big kind of inspiration in that respect. My family are and continue to be. And also literally in every company, every enterprise, every media agency, ad agency, with the indie list now, with Una, you know, I found people who are really inspirational, who kind of give you the chance to do stuff that you wouldn't have normally got somewhere else, back you, because sometimes you're almost afraid to back yourself. And that's been, again, really, really helpful. And then kind of outside of that, the people I tend to kind of admire and respect are the people who never settle in the music and particularly in the music industry, because I have huge interest in music. And, you know, people like, I know, you know, he may not be everybody's favorite, but Paul McCartney, again, Nick Cave, I referenced earlier on. And in Ireland, we have some incredible music creators, people like Donald Lunny, one of the unsung heroes of Irish traditional music, who played with Planksty and some of the other groups. Philip King, who's the man behind the Other Voices Festival, which is world renowned now in music. And even an artist like Glenn Hansard, who, you know, is an Oscar winner, you know, started off busking. But again, they're the artists who never settled. They never said, well, the last album, I'll just do more of what I did in the last album and repeat that again. They're always looking for, and Damon Albarn is another type of individual like that. You know, I'm not a biggest Damon Albarn fan of type of music, but I admire him for always kind of pushing the boundaries out. And it's those type of people that I take kind of inspiration from, yeah.
There's some great examples there, Peter. Thank you. What about advice? You obviously
Don't
share
listen to anything that a man
advice.
from Dublin worked in media will tell you. The first piece of advice.
Very good.
Oh, look, there's a few things I would say. I mean, I kind of touched on it along the way is you know, treat others the way you'd like your kids to be treated. So if they were going for their first job, it's not even how you'd be treated, but, you know, if your kid was going for a job in a particular place or was working in a particular place, how would you like them to be treated in the way you're treating others? So I kind of always kind of take that as very much to heart. And as I say, what was drilled into us over time was that respect for people who are hardworking, regardless of the work that they did. The second thing I would say to hopefully your listeners is to, you know, stay completely open to new things. So whether that's reading stuff or listening to things like podcasts and your own podcast, and, you know, outside of your normal kind of wheelhouse, whether that's marketing or engineering or IT or whatever it is, have a listen to other stuff, because it stimulates different ways of approaching particular problems or opportunities. And the third thing for me has always been about give young people a chance, because, you know, I was that young person at one stage. I remember the very first agency job that I managed to cajole somebody into giving me. You know, I was the only person on a particular course who was interested in media. Everybody else wanted to be a creative, and I wanted to be a creative as well, but I was not as good as the rest of them in the class. So I said media, and somebody gave me a chance, and, you know, the rest of the thing is history, I suppose. But giving young people a chance is really important. And I think back to some of the things you touched on earlier on, there are so many different and newer skill sets that younger people have that older guys like me and people like me don't have within the industry and other industries. And look, you know, again, cliche, you know, the future is very much about the young, and we need to trust them and give them a chance. So I think if you have young people on your workforce, or you're considering, oh, I'll just promote that person who's always been with me, give somebody else a chance. I think that's really important. And the final thing I would say is don't stay in a job or move a job just for the money. I've tried to avoid that in my career. I've said no to many jobs. I've said no and then said yes. But always, and I've tried to instill this into my own kids as well, don't just move for the money, because the money will inevitably, or should inevitably, follow the talent and the expertise you have to bring. The amount of time that you spend working will never compensate you for working in a miserable job or one that's going to ruin your soul. Because we all spend so much time working, as we all know. And, you know, so many people have had their lives wrecked by, you know, wrong choices around work and sticking in kind of toxic environments that are just bad for your health. And nobody needs to do that anymore, I believe. And now, probably easy, somebody will say, for you to say that as somebody sitting in a company in Dublin, but I absolutely believe that. There are so many different opportunities now for people to earn money. But job satisfaction and life satisfaction is much more important than most of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, very insightful advice. Thank you, Peter. Last couple of things before we wrap up today. I want to ask
this podcast might end up as 90 minutes long.
I was going to ask you if there's anything else we haven't touched on that you'd like to share with our audience, and also, and importantly, if people want to find out more about the work that you and the team do over at the Indie List, where's the best place to send people to?
I think, look, every day we do stuff on LinkedIn, because, look, we've found it just a great channel through which to communicate with our community. People who are not on the Indie List, clients who are not clients of the Indie List. Not saying we populate it with crap. Well, maybe some people think it's crap, but we're doing something on the Irish language at the moment, because it's Seachtain na Gaeilge, which is the traditional time of the year when the Irish language, which is only spoken by 2% of the population, but it's a beautiful language. We've said, look, we think this is our responsibility as much as any other company to promote the use of the Irish language. So, you know, so we use things like LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is probably our first go-to place, and then obviously the website indielist.ie. And I'm on LinkedIn, but most of the stuff I tend to post now tends to be via the Indie List LinkedIn page. Pick my posts carefully when it comes to things like music and other things. If I really feel strongly about something, then I'll post it or I want to share it. Yeah.
Well, that's great. That's a nice point to end on. So anybody who's interested in finding out more, the indielist.ie for our international audiences. And of course, on LinkedIn, you can find out all the latest happenings and goings on. So thank you so much indeed to Peter for joining me today here on the Global Discussion. Thank you to all our listeners and people watching this episode around the world. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, do all the things I need you to do to help support the podcast. And I hope you'll meet me back here for more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. Thank you, Peter. It's been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you today.
And thank you, Simon. Likewise, really, again, a great privilege to be on and with so many other great people that you've had. And I wish you all the best with it. Yeah, it's been fantastic. Great chat. It's like being in the pub with you with no drink.
Thank you, my friend.